Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I like to discuss the rejection of attempts by some pro-Brexit unionists to force a judicial review into the legality of the Northern Ireland Protocol, as it seems to backfire quite spectacularly. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So there's both ridicule here and a serious side to the story. Essentially, and I don't necessarily want to simplify matters too much, but I'm going to, some Brexiteers have tried to challenge the legality of the Northern Ireland Protocol in the hopes that the courts would decide that the treaty couldn't stand and should no longer exist. Their main argument was that the Northern Ireland Protocol contradicts the Acts of Union which originally bound Ireland, now just Northern Ireland, to the UK. A Belfast court has essentially thrown out the case. Not because their main argument was wrong, however. In essence, they were absolutely bang on the money. The Northern Ireland Protocol is indeed at odds with the Act of Union from over 2 centuries ago. That's what the judge said. Yeah, absolutely a contradiction there. But it's not the protocol that has to make way, which is what the plaintiffs wanted, but the original legislation. The judge explained in his judgment that the Northern Ireland Protocol essentially updates the Acts of Union. In other words, the Acts of Union are no longer what they were before Brexit. This is because the Withdrawal Act was expressly agreed by Parliament and therefore overrode the earlier acts. So their main argument was also what sunk their case. They did have another argument in that the protocol also breached the Good Friday Agreement, they said. Something that none of them were in favour of, so a bit of a cheek to try and use it, but still. The judge concluded that this was not actually the case. Now, that wasn't a definitive, the Northern Ireland Protocol does not tread on the toes of the Good Friday Agreement. It wasn't that wide-ranging a judgment. It focused on key arguments put forward, which included the viperous Kate Hoey, for example, and Ben Habib. But it's the first judgment I've seen that essentially says that the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Good Friday Agreement can sit side by side perfectly well. Albeit, as I said, only considering the particular aspects of the latter. I think, what was it? Sections 1 and section something else they'd argued about. But as the unionists who brought the case will inevitably have tried to cite the most sensitive parts of the Good Friday Agreement, from their point of view, that is, that does potentially massively deflate any arguments that the protocol threatens the peace process. So if there's a threat to the peace process, it is coming from people who are refusing to engage with the protocol, not because of the protocol. And bear in mind that the people who are essentially up in arms about the Northern Ireland Protocol are the same politicians who backed Brexit. You reap what you sow. Ben Habib, who is one of the driving forces behind Brexit and who, as I said, was also in on this, tried to get the consequence of his own destruction thrown out in court, said a couple of things. Well, I said a few things, I suppose, of interest. But firstly, he seemed to think that the Supreme Court will arrive at a different verdict. You know, as you would in a case like this, you know, you've gone to the High Court in Belfast in this case, and you haven't got the result you want. So then you go to the higher court, so the highest court, the Supreme Court. Of course, you're going to talk about, oh, yeah, well, we'll get this overturned at the next level. And good news, we get to see this nonsense discussed in the highest court in the land next. And it is nonsense. Like, I'm not a legal expert. Yes, there are times when the Supreme Court makes a judgment that the High Court could not. That's why the Supreme Court sort of exists. Johnson's unlawful prorogation of Parliament was a very famous such verdict. But what the likes of Hoey and Habib and the rest are trying to argue is that a court can tell Parliament that an international treaty that it voted for cannot stand. And this is where you don't really need to be a particularly legal expert, because we know from the Supreme Court's unanimous decision against Johnson's law-breaking in 2019 that Parliament is sovereign. That was made very, very clear. If we didn't know it before, that is. Parliament is the law of the land. There is no law that they cannot enact, repeal or amend. They didn't, for example, need a referendum in order to pull us out of the EU. This is why, despite the referendum being unlawful, the courts could do nothing about it. If the referendum was an essential part of it, it would have had to have been rerun, because the court said, yes, this was conducted unlawfully. But they also said But the referendum has nothing to do with being in or out of the EU. That's up for Parliament to decide. The referendum is only advisory, so nothing they could do about it. The referendum was irrelevant to the process. We left the EU because Parliament voted to leave the EU. All there is to it. You know, we have a customs border in the Irish Sea because Parliament voted for it. We run that customs border on one side by EU customs rules because Parliament voted for it. The second thing he noted was that the Northern Ireland Protocol has opposed the Act of Union, the implication being that Johnson's treaty has weakened the Union. Give the man a banana. Exactly what Brexit has done, and exactly what many of us warned that Brexit would do, including a former Conservative Prime Minister. Another point of interest in the case was the argument that Northern Irish citizens' human rights were being breached because they couldn't influence EU laws applied in the region because they had no elected representatives in the EU Parliament. I mean, whose fault's that? But this argument was also thrown out. But I have a couple of things to say about that. First of all, these are the people who deliberately engineered the outcome whereby people in Northern Ireland had no EU parliamentary representation. They cheered it when it happened. And secondly, weren't these the same people who kept arguing about EU laws before? You know, like this EU, which apparently was very different to the UK, was forcing laws onto us. Wasn't that what they said was the point of leaving the EU? Well, if having MEPs meant influence over those laws, doesn't that mean we actually had a say in those laws as EU members? So it wasn't the EU forcing laws on the UK. We were all part of it. And as one of the very few countries with quite a large block of MEPs, didn't that mean we had quite a lot of influence over those EU laws? Not entirely convinced that they're being consistent here. But then I suppose consistency was never part of the Brexiteers' toolkit. They make up whatever argument suits them at the time, even if it contradicts a position they took the day before or will take the day after for a different argument or audience. But in terms of what has been achieved with this attempt at judicial review, hasn't been a waste. We've learned that Brexit has weakened the Act of Union, the very legislation that underpins the UK. Habib, in his post-judgment comments, even pointed out that part of the Act has been effectively rewritten. All parts of the United Kingdom should be equally accessible to all other parts, and that the peoples of the UK are all equal, and that no government may sign a treaty which differentiates between parts of the UK. He thought that was his trump card. It says here that no government may sign a treaty which differentiates between parts of the UK. The Northern Ireland Protocol does that. Yeah, it does. They can't do it. But he missed the fact that the Parliament which enacted those lines 2 centuries ago was no more powerful than the one in session now. There is no legislation that our Parliament cannot enact that a later Parliament cannot repeal or amend. It may not always be wise to, but there is nothing to stop them. And after all, wasn't Brexit also about letting our Parliament produce our own laws? We want our Parliament to decide our laws. No, not those laws. No, not those ones either. No, stop with the laws. That's how it's going now. But Brexit has weakened the Act of Union. It's there in black and white from a High Court judge in Belfast. As such, it has weakened the Union itself. The oddest thing about this case is not the judgment, but that the people who have caused this weakness are the ones bringing it. It's not unlike a person basically prosecuting themselves, except these guys are not taking responsibility for their actions, but blaming Boris Johnson for doing what they told him to do, and what they were cheering late 2019. Like Ben Habib was an MEP at the time. He was part of the European Parliament that voted on the withdrawal agreement, which included the Northern Ireland Protocol, that he has just tried to have thrown out by a court. He voted in favour of it. Now, people will say, and he will say, but I wasn't happy about it at the time. I wrote this whole piece. Not interested in what he said about it. Because here's the thing. I'm not interested in what any politician has to say if they vote a different way. Plenty of charlatans in politics. They will argue one way and vote another. That way, if what went through with the vote turns out all right, they'll go, well, I voted for it. And if it doesn't, they'll say, but I argued against it. You don't get it both ways. For a politician, how did you vote? That's what matters. That's the thing of consequence. Not what you write in some Tory rag or your own blog What? How did you vote? Oh, you voted for it. That's it. That's all that counted. The vote was everything. So he can own it now. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.